I have $2 million, but I eat alone. The curse of being rich. I have $2 million. It took me 40 years to build that number. 40 years of discipline, of early mornings, of calculated risks, of saying no when everyone else was saying yes. I did everything the way they tell you to do it. I saved aggressively. I invested consistently. I avoided lifestyle inflation. I delayed gratification so long it became my personality. Now I'm 68 years old, and I eat alone. That is not a metaphor. Every evening around 6:30, I set a plate on the table in a dining room that is too large for one person. The house is quiet, not peaceful. Quiet. The kind of quiet that echoes. The kind that makes you aware of every fork scraping porcelain. I built this life on purpose. That's what makes it harder to admit. I told myself relationships could wait, social gatherings could wait, travel could wait, love could wait. I was building something secure, something that would allow me to relax later, something that would make me attractive, respected, admired. Money first, life later. That was the equation, and I solved it perfectly. I remember the early years when I was hungry in every sense of the word. I worked late not because anyone forced me to, but because I believed urgency was my advantage. I watched colleagues go home to dinners, birthdays, weekend trips. I stayed. I told myself I was investing in freedom. Freedom from what? From financial anxiety, from dependence, from vulnerability. But I never asked myself what I might be building instead. Isolation compounds the way money does. Quietly, predictably, relentlessly. At first, being alone felt efficient. No compromises, no emotional drama, no negotiations about schedules or priorities. My time was fully mine. My goals were clear. I mistook independence for strength. Strength without connection becomes brittle. I dated casually in my 30s, occasionally in my 40s. But I was always distracted, always calculating the opportunity cost of time. If a relationship required attention, I measured it against potential earnings. If a conversation ran long, I thought about the emails waiting. No one ever accused me of being cruel. They just eventually said I wasn't present. They were right. I wasn't present. I was projecting myself into a future where everything would finally align. I imagined a version of myself at 65 who would be wealthy, relaxed, desirable. I assumed that money would compensate for the years I wasn't fully available. That success would retroactively justify absence. It doesn't work that way. By the time I reached my target, something else had already solidified. My habits, my routines, my emotional distance. You cannot delay connection for decades and expect it to bloom on command. I tried, briefly. After I crossed the 2 million mark, I felt triumphant for exactly 3 days. Then I felt empty in a way I didn't anticipate. I had reached the summit I'd been climbing toward for most of my adult life, and there was no one standing there with me. I told myself that was fine, that now I had time. Now I could date intentionally. Now I could build friendships. Now I could travel not as a businessman, but as a human being. But connection doesn't respond to urgency the way money does. You can't invest aggressively in people and expect compound returns on schedule. Trust grows slowly. Intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is a muscle I had allowed to atrophy. The first time I truly noticed the curse wasn't during some dramatic holiday. It was on a Tuesday. I had cooked something simple, sat down at the table, looked up out of habit as if someone might meet my eyes. No one did. The house held its breath with me. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. I had optimized my life for control, and control is lonely. In the next thread, I'll tell you what money quietly does to your relationships over time, and how wealth can slowly turn you into someone people admire from a distance instead of someone they want to sit beside. Money changes how people approach you long before you realize it. At first it feels subtle, small comments, jokes about you picking up the check, assumptions about your availability, invitations that seem warm but carry a faint edge of expectation. You tell yourself you're imagining it, that you're becoming paranoid. But over time, the pattern sharpens. Some people lean closer, others lean away. The ones who lean closer are often drawn to what you represent. not who you are. Security, opportunity, access. They don't ask about your fears. They ask about your portfolio. They don't wonder what keeps you awake at night. They wonder what you're investing in next. The ones who lean away feel something else: comparison, distance, a subtle discomfort in not knowing where they stand relative to you. Money creates invisible hierarchies in conversations. Even if you never mention it, it hums beneath the surface. I didn't flaunt my wealth. I didn't buy exotic cars or oversized houses. In fact, I lived below my means almost obsessively. But that didn't protect me from the shift. People sense it. Success alters posture. It changes the way you make decisions. It alters how you respond to risk. I became careful in ways that extended beyond finances. Careful with trust, careful with disclosure, careful with generosity. I started wondering whether invitations were genuine or strategic, whether affection was authentic or influenced by my stability. Suspicion is another form of isolation, and once it settles in, it doesn't leave easily. I dated more seriously in my late 50s. I told myself this time I would show up fully, that I would not let work overshadow connection. But I noticed something uncomfortable about myself. I evaluated relationships the way I evaluated investments. What's the downside? What's the long-term viability? What's the exit strategy? Romance does not thrive under analysis. I thought I was being mature, thoughtful, strategic. In reality, I was guarded. Every emotional interaction ran through a filter of risk assessment. I had spent decades minimizing financial risk. I began minimizing emotional risk the same way. That makes you stable. It does not make you intimate. There's a moment in many dinners when conversation dips, a natural pause, an opportunity for vulnerability, a confession, a story from childhood, a fear about aging. That is where connection deepens. I often filled those pauses with something practical, safe, neutral. I redirected away from depth because depth requires surrender, and surrender felt dangerous. You don't build $2 million without learning to control outcomes. You don't accumulate that kind of stability without mastering discipline. But discipline, when applied everywhere, can suffocate spontaneity. I began noticing something else. People stopped challenging me. When you're financially secure, especially later in life, others assume you have it figured out. They don't offer unsolicited advice. They don't push you emotionally. They don't assume you need help. They treat you like someone who has already arrived. But arrival is an illusion. I hadn't arrived anywhere meaningful. I had accumulated. There's a difference. I remember attending a small dinner gathering a few years ago. 4 couples. Laughter. Stories about travel and grandchildren. At some point, someone asked what I was most proud of. I gave the answer I always give. The disciplined investing, the consistency, the freedom from debt. They nodded politely. Then one of the women said something that lingered. That must feel safe. Safe. Not joyful, not fulfilling. Safe. I went home that night and sat in my living room long after midnight. I realized I had become someone people described with respect but not warmth. Responsible, smart, disciplined, stable. Rarely did anyone say I was open, or generous emotionally, or deeply connected. Money had amplified my strengths. It had also solidified my defenses. The curse of being rich is not that you have too much. It's that you can begin to believe you don't need anyone. And once that belief settles in, even subtly, people feel it. They sense that you are self-contained, that you are complete on your own, that there is no room to enter, and eventually, they stop trying. I didn't notice when invitations decreased, when phone calls became less frequent, when holidays turned into quiet evenings with polite text messages instead of shared tables. Isolation doesn't arrive with a warning, it accumulates, just like money. In the final thread, I'll tell you what I finally understood about wealth and loneliness, and why having $2 million cannot buy the one thing I postponed for too long. There is a particular sound a house makes when no one else lives in it. It's not silence exactly, it's absence. The refrigerator hums. The air conditioning clicks on and off. The floor shifts slightly with temperature. But there is no counterpoint. No second set of footsteps. No voice calling from another room. No laughter bleeding under a closed door. For years, I told myself I preferred it that way. Peaceful, uncomplicated, efficient. Now I understand something I refused to see before. Peace without witness feels empty. One evening not long ago, I took out 2 plates without thinking. Habit from some distant version of myself that once imagined sharing meals regularly. I stood there for a moment, holding the second plate, staring at it as if it had betrayed me. I put it back. That small act felt heavier than it should have. I have $2 million. I could book a flight anywhere tomorrow. I could dine in the finest restaurants. I could upgrade every comfort. I could hire help for anything that inconveniences me. There is no financial barrier between me and comfort. And yet, every night, I sit alone at my own table. The truth I finally had to confront is this: money solves logistical problems. It does not solve emotional ones. It can remove stress. It cannot create belonging. It can eliminate certain fears. It cannot manufacture intimacy. And the worst part is not the loneliness itself. It's the awareness that I chose it incrementally. I chose work over dinners. I chose planning over spontaneity. I chose control over vulnerability. Each decision felt rational in the moment. No single choice screamed sacrifice. But over decades, those choices shaped a life optimized for independence, not connection. Independence is admirable until it becomes impenetrable. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had allowed myself to be less efficient. If I had let projects wait. If I had risked emotional entanglement when it felt inconvenient. If I had valued shared experiences as highly as compounded returns. But regret is a poor investment strategy. It doesn't grow anything. What I can do now is speak honestly about the curse. The curse of being rich is not greed. It's insulation. You become insulated from discomfort, yes, but also from dependence. And dependence is not weakness. It is the fabric of human connection. To depend on someone and to let them depend on you is to weave your life with theirs. I avoided that weaving. I thought self-sufficiency was strength. Now I understand that strength without shared weight is hollow. People sometimes tell me I'm lucky, that I did everything right, that I can relax, that I won the game. But no one defines what the game was supposed to be. If the goal was accumulation, I succeeded. If the goal was a life rich in shared moments, I miscalculated. There is a memory that returns to me often. I was in my late 30s. A woman I cared about asked me gently, "Do you ever stop planning and just feel?" At the time, I dismissed it as sentimentality. Now I recognize it as invitation. An invitation I declined, not because I didn't care, because I was busy building security. Security arrived. She did not. There is still time, people say. Maybe there is. But connection at this stage requires unlearning decades of guardedness. It requires admitting that wealth did not solve the deeper hunger. It requires vulnerability in a body that has grown accustomed to self-containment. That is harder than earning money ever was. If you are listening to this while still climbing, still building, still accumulating, I am not telling you to stop. Discipline matters, stability matters, security matters. But do not postpone connection as if it will be waiting politely for you at the summit. It won't. Relationships require investment too, not financial investment. Emotional presence, time, attention, imperfection, risk. I invested everything in growth charts. I neglected the human balance sheet. Now I sit at a table large enough for 6, eating alone. The house is quiet. The accounts are full. And I would trade a portion of that number, quietly, without announcement, for one ordinary evening where someone across from me is not impressed by my net worth, but interested in my heart. I have $2 million, but I am still hungry. And that is the part no one sees when they call me successful.